There were renewed calls last year for stricter gun legislation following the deadliest shooting in modern U.S. history. Some Democrats blamed inaction from their Republican colleagues for the attack in Las Vegas and accused the gun lobby of making money off of it. In a recent op-ed in the New York Times, one woman says not only is the gun lobby not working to prevent mass shootings, but it's also hindering suicide prevention. Erin Dunkerly is a lawyer in California and wrote that piece for the Times. She joins me now from Los Angeles. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you, Elaine.
So first I want to just ask you why you wrote this piece.
Well, my background with newspapers is that my father, growing up, would write letters to the editor all the time. So that's a distinct memory I have of him. He died by suicide in 2006 using a firearm he found in a friend's dresser drawer. I since became involved with a nonprofit, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. After I was removed due to their alliance with the National Shooting Sports Foundation, my local church group, the All Saints Episcopal Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, and I worked together. And after we learned this year that other volunteers and gun violence prevention groups in San Diego and Portland, Maine, had similar experiences with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, they asked me to write an op-ed.
Well, we often hear from lawmakers, Erin, about gun control measures after mass shootings, but the CDC says that in 2014, 63% of gun deaths in the United States were suicides and 32% were homicides. Why do you think suicide deaths from firearms get less attention from lawmakers?
I think the reason for that is there's such a stigma attached to suicide. It hasn't been that recent that a lot of people weren't willing to talk about their own personal experience with suicide. The statistic I once heard was for every suicide, there are 6 people who are affected at least. And I know that it was after my dad's death, when I finally started to be vocal about how it was that he died, that more and more people seemed drawn out of the woodwork and started to talk to me about their own experiences with suicide. So I think that the answer is that there's still a stigma attached to suicide and therefore also attached to suicide by firearm.
You mentioned a couple of organizations a moment ago. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the National Shooting Sports Foundation have a brochure about firearms and suicide prevention. And you wrote that it is, quote, woefully insufficient from a health perspective. Why do you think so?
I say that because after my dad died, I was surprised to learn, based on certain scientific studies, that the presence of a firearm in a home, even if it's kept secure, is associated with higher risk of completed suicide. The brochure that the AFSP and the NSSF have put out doesn't mention that fact at all, that there's inherent risk associated with having a gun in the home. And second, that brochure only addressed different ways of storing firearms that cost money. Nowhere in the brochure do they identify for people that, as a consumer, their choice could also be not to have a firearm in the home in the first place, or if you do have a firearm, that you could perhaps turn it in or resell it in order to keep you and your loved ones safe.
Do you think that gun control advocates are focusing too much on gun murders?
I think personally, yes. I think just, and it's hard to say don't focus on gun murders because they're certainly atrocious and they shock us as a community, and I think it should be a point of focus. However, given the number of people who die every day in this country from suicide by firearm, I certainly think it's an issue that deserves a lot more attention, both from gun control advocates and from people who are pro-Second Amendment, maintaining their guns.
All right, we'll continue to see if anything changes in the gun debate arena. Erin Dunkerly, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Appreciate it.